Yeah, hey, we're in this series, finding your first person of peace. Each of our series, or most of them, are connected to one of the elements of of raising the sails for movement, and this one would be going out among the lost. I've not done this intentionally, but I've kind of launched each week with sharing just this guy that I'm taking through a training in southern India right now, and I just want to share another piece about that as we dive into it. It's been really cool. So if someone's watching this down the road, they can journey with me taking a guy in India through this. His name's Ananta, and he had planted many legacy churches before, but this stuff is brand new to him. And I shared with you the last couple of weeks that when I said, "What's a stress or struggle in your life?" that he shared this couple that their house had been burned down. They were pastors, and I shared last week it was much more intense than even that. That the Hindu radicals came into their house and beat him up, repeatedly raped his wife as they held him down, and they held down their 4 and 8-year-old kids, and then burned down the house, had them have no clothes, and then burned everything they owned and left them there. And so that's what I shared with you last week. Then last Friday, Ananta, we'd sent some money to help them out. He calls me and he says, they want to talk to you on the phone, or do a on WhatsApp, a video call. And I got that on an early morning, and they said, "Can we do this in the next 30 minutes?" You've maybe read articles of like that happening to people. I had never like been in a conversation. This time, this had happened like 6 days before. What do you say to somebody like that? You know, that they've just gone through this. It's like, feels like anything I say just feels incomplete. And I don't want to share anything I said, but I was just so moved by what they said and what they did. I just wanted to pass this on to you as we dive in today. This couple, Uriah and Charla, they smiled the whole time as they're with me, and they said this right at the beginning. They said, "We had told Jesus already that we were willing to die for him, so we're grateful that we're still alive." And then they said, "We've already forgiven the men that have done this to us, and we feel peace in our hearts." And they said, "And we are overwhelmed with gratitude that there's people in the United States that are praying for us, that are financially helping us in this tough time. Please pray for our kids. It's obviously traumatic for them." And I just came off this call. I prayed for them, and we said, "Hey, let's stay in touch." But they said, "We have not given up on ministry. We will go back, but we have some times of healing right now." And it just made me go, if there's as we're talking about this stuff, first of all, there's people that are really putting their lives on the line uh, to do this. And when I was at a conference this last week, and we sang a song about being willing to die for Jesus. And I thought, that is so easy to sing. It's another thing to actually live that out. So I just give the context for us as we're diving into this stuff. Hey, this is real. And maybe you're going, this is a stretch for me, but it's not a stretch for us, nowhere near compared to other people around the world of what they're willing to give up, in order to preach the gospel all over the place. So I'm going to share a little bit about Nata in a little bit, but so we're talking about finding your first person of peace. Let me do a little bit of review before we go forward. We've just said this is a breakthrough. We believe that if you find your first person of peace, like all of a sudden it's like, oh shoot, there's more. and you'll see many more after you find a first one. Maybe you've already found several, and this is helping someone else do that as well. But so we said, what are the habits of someone who does this? And probably your habits are going to need to be different than what your habits have been before in some ways, if you're going to do something you haven't done before. And so first habit we said a couple of weeks ago, Sheila gave an incredible example of that, is we just said the habit of praying specifically and expectantly. And I said, you don't have to use this exact prayer, but this is a great one, which exactly what she just said. Hey, would you pray, God, would you use me to find a person of peace, disciple them, see them come to Christ, baptize them, get out of the way, and watch them baptize others? And are you praying that regularly? If you're not, I want to say that we're going to talk about today and next week in the series, man, it's just dumb for you even to apply it if you're not going to apply the first piece. That's so important that we're asking God to do the stuff that only he could do. And there's a faithfulness of continuing to move on and on. But for us, and the last week, we've baptized 3 persons apiece. And it's been so exciting seeing this. And another person of peace who we already baptized, he texted me this morning and said, hey, several family members want to get baptized in the next week. of from that. So I think as you pray this and as you live out these habits, man, God starts to work and starts to move, and it's really exciting. Yeah, we baptized Hector, Josh, and Bobby this last week, and uh, yeah, it's like the funnest thing in the world to do. So, and they're all no, and one of the questions we've been asking when we baptize, the third question we ask now is, and is it your plan to disciple others and then baptize them yourself? And I never used to ask that before baptizing people, but now we go, hey, we want them to get that from day one. So, anyways, that's the first habit. Second habit we talked about last week was just the habit of being prepared, being ready. Are you ready for like a person of peace? And we had three different ways we said of being ready. You probably could come up with 10, but we came up with three. We said, first one was, hey, are you ready for how you're going to pray for people? And Susie just gave some great truths on preparation of when you're praying for people in the field. One of the things I wrote down that I applied, this was my I will from or next step from last week was, hey, after I pray for someone, asking the question, hey, how do you feel now? Like I actually believe God's going to do something. Like I never asked that before. I think because I wasn't really expecting God to do anything. Now I'm like, oh yeah, he probably could do something right now. So that was big for me. Then Brent talked about the idea of preparation and sharing your 15-second testimony. And if you missed last week, you need to watch all these parts, but that part, man, that's huge in terms of getting into conversations with people and moving people, right? If you're vulnerable, other people will be vulnerable. So that was big. And then I showed the last part of sharing Bible stories and just that you should have some stories ready to go. And I said last week that I have 7 stories that I share regularly. I'll use others, but 7 main ones. And then I think I just listed 6. So let me say my 7 real quick. My group called me out on it and said, Jim, you didn't say all of them. So here's the ones that I use. These aren't magical. Here's just ones that I found fit really well in terms of conversations with people. I like to use the 10 lepers, Mary and Martha. Jesus calms the storm. Jesus and Peter walk on water. The prodigal son. Jesus heals the paralyzed guy that goes through the roof. I know I said that quick. And then the Shema, especially if there are people that are parents, maybe they have a faith background. It's real easy to lead into that. So that's the second habit. Those just being prepared and going, are you ready? And then here's the third one we would say, as we're moving towards in 2 weeks, we're going to not have any extra teaching. We're just going to have an open mic and people share about, hey, persons of peace they found or potential persons of peace or steps of faith they've taken in this. But here's the third one I think that's big, and I've got 2 parts in it. And it's always be on mission. That I found people that find persons of peace are always on mission. Their eyes are always open to what God's doing. And you sure see that like with Jesus and Paul. Like they were ready to do ministry while they were doing ministry. Like a lot of us are pastors, so we're already doing ministry, but like being able I think Jesus had the art of being interruptible. Of I'm always on mission. God, what do you want to do? I don't just check out grocery or go to the grocery store and get groceries. I'm always looking, and I see that Jesus with the bleeding woman. He's on his way to raise a girl from the dead, and he has enough connection with the Father to go, oh, there's some more ministry, and to heal this woman. Oh, Jesus is hanging out with some Pharisees, and obviously it's some pretty tense stuff. He's in this house, and then this woman starts washing his feet, and Jesus realizes, oh, this is where it's at. And he was ready to do ministry there. Or Paul with the Philippian jailer, right? I mean, he is, I've heard, was in agony all night. The stocks that they would have put him in this jail in Philippi, and all kinds of pain. They've been whipped and beaten. Man, God does this miracle. They get out. You would think, all right, the Lord has spoken. And instead they stop and they find the person of peace in that moment. Right. So this idea of going, I'm always on mission. And I want to share just 2 thoughts that's been helpful for me in that. And then we're going to live out one of them. And here's the first one. So, and they all start with always. Always be dripping God. Everywhere you go, be dripping God in your conversation, dripping God in the things that you do. It's in the training, it would be the idea of Shema lifestyle. But sometimes you don't even have total time to do Shema actions, but just the idea of dripping God where you go. Like I was talking with a friend recently, and they were on a flight and they're trying to live out, DMM principles. And they shared about in this conversation they had with the person next to them on the plane. They said, yeah, I just didn't really feel like God wanted me to move it spiritual. And I don't know. I don't feel like all the time everything has to always be spiritual. I'm not that guy. But I was like, you sat next to this person for a couple hours and you never even did anything to like potentially see if it could go spiritual. Like, I think God wants us to always be dripping God of, you just let God flow out of your mouth as you're talking, not like you're preaching at them, but just you're giving opportunities for them to be able to latch onto something. And they might not, and that's fine. Then there's freedom. We're looking for people that God's already been working in. But so as you're getting to know them, you might just drip in about, yeah, I'm out here because I'm learning how to tell stories with people. That's an intriguing thing to say. Or if you're in ministry, I still think it's okay to go, yeah, I pastor a church for people that don't like church, or I whatever, say something that where you're dripping God in it. And if they don't then initiate back, okay, but always be looking for those opportunities to do that sort of thing. And heard a lot of people will say, hey, always pray for opportunities. I don't see that though so much in scripture. What I see is people praying for boldness. Uh, the opportunities come if you're bold. And so just going, God, would you make me bold? And a lot of times opportunities will come because I initiated by dripping God in the conversation. And then God was already working in their lives and they respond. Give some examples of what this has looked like for us. My wife, we have very different personalities. And like, I'm going out prayer walking, talking to strangers all the time. She did that for a year until she realized, I don't think I have to do this. So she's making disciples totally. And she's on the PTA and she's doing working with our kids soccer teams, and she's a substitute teacher, and she drips gods and shares stories like the best of them. But we have different personalities. But here's one thing she's found is she does Walmart pickup, and whoever delivers the food into the back of the car, she just says to them, I'm trying to learn the principle of people that serve me, I want to serve them back. Is there any way I could pray for you? And so she says that automatically every time. And this is a little while back, but this guy Cameron said, yeah, I'd love some prayer. And he shared some requests. I don't even remember what it was. But and this was before we were even like not inviting people to church for us. And so they exchanged numbers and said, come to our church. And Cameron came one time. And that's it. And I don't think he and I even met up, but we kind of started a relationship. And I told him some stories over time and I put him on my prayer calendar. And Cameron's been a guy that he's like every other month. So he's always a month away from getting kicked off my prayer calendar. But then he shows up again. And anyways, but because my wife dripped God into him, like this is probably a year and a half ago. She does this every time. But a year and a half ago, I met this guy, Cameron. Cameron, like 2 weeks ago, called me and said, Jim, my father-in-law just passed away. And I have a lot of questions about God. And I don't know who to talk to. Can I talk to you? And we had this amazing conversation. He said, I'd like to be talking to, can we get back into doing stories again? And so you never even know what's going to happen, but simply because my wife just in a real simple way, brought up this opportunity for prayer to this guy. Hey, here's what God's doing 2 years later. Another simple way maybe even is we've got kids that are 12, 9, and 8. On my prayer calendar, I put my kids' teachers on it. And I just send them an email and just go, hey, thank you so much for pouring into whichever kid that is. I do this thing called a prayer calendar, and it just means I pray for people that are in my life. And whether you like it or not, you're in my life because you're an important part of my daughter's life. I'd like to pray for you once a month if that's okay. And it's just real simple, but man, that turns into things, right? So just thinking of now my son turned into middle school and he's got 7 different teachers. That becomes way more tough. So anyways, but so that's a thing of how you can drip God. I do some real estate stuff on the side that now pays for what the church used to pay me. Now this does it. And a couple of weeks ago, I'm looking at this home, and the guy who was living in the home, he's not the owner, but he's like, yeah, we got to find a new place. And so I just said, hey, well, I kind of have a couple jobs. I buy houses, and I'm a pastor on the side, and then I also help people find homes. And I just said those 3 things so I could say the thing in the middle about the pastor. Oh, you're a pastor? Yeah. And he starts sharing his story with me about going, wow, man, I kind of used to follow God, but I haven't for a while. And my kids really are nowhere with God. And I said, well, I love helping parents learn how they can be spiritual leaders in their homes. Besides helping me helping you find a house. Can I tell you a Bible story right now? Boom. Man, and we're on a couple stories in with this guy. It makes sense. So just this idea of always be, it's not, maybe you guys are going, Jim, we already do that. But always be on mission of this idea of of ways you can just simply, and sometimes it's even just be kind to somebody because you know you're going to see them again when you get groceries next week, but you're moving in a progression of doing that. So that's the first one we just put down. The second, just put of the idea of always being on mission is, and I've got a lot of help from a friend who sends me books. She's on this call, and there's a great ministry in sending people books. You know that, like, you can cast great vision when you send someone a book. Anyway, so the second would be this: is always be listening to God. So I think we're listening to God by dripping God in conversation and letting other people speak back. But the second way also would be is listening to the Holy Spirit. And this friend, her name's Susie. You guys all know her. So she but sent me a book called God Guides. And it's not even a book. It's like a pamphlet. It's like 60 pages. I'm on page 19. So maybe I don't even, anyways, it's very fresh for me. But it's this woman living in India. And one of the first pages, I'm going to share a story from her life and then from my life, what this looks like. And you guys probably run circles around me on this, but this has been very huge for me. So this woman has a coworker that she just is frustrated with all the time because this coworker has 10 kids. And so she's always having to cover for this woman. And it's kind of resentful. Like, why do you even have a job that, you know, if I have to always cover for you? And she is trying to learn this idea of listening to God and God, what do you want me to do? Instead of just, I'm really good at praying and telling God what to do, but listening, man, that's where the power is. And so God tells her, after she listens for a while, bring an egg over to this coworker. And she's like, I'm not bringing an egg to this coworker's house. If it was a dozen eggs, maybe that makes sense, but a single egg, that's dumb. Goes to work, comes back. There's a chicken sitting on her front porch that had gotten loose. They had chickens to their house. And she brushes the chicken away, and there's an egg sitting underneath the chicken. She's like, all right, God, okay, I'll do it. So she goes, I'll take the egg. She gets there, and one of the woman's kids is out front of the house, and she's like, oh, good, I don't even have to see her. She just goes, hey, will you give this egg to your mom? Gives it to her mom. She's like, God, I did it. The woman calls her 30 minutes later and in tears and says, thank you so much for that egg. You have no idea what that meant to me. She's like, what are you talking about? And she said, well, we've got 10 kids, which means a lot of times we're financially really struggling and we don't have enough food for everybody to eat. And usually that means I don't eat. And this was one of those days where I was not eating. I was just really struggling physically and going, God, would you give me strength? And just in my worst moment, one of my kids walks in and says that you showed up and gave an egg for me. So I made the egg and I ate it. And it felt like a 5-course meal. Like God just supplied, and I feel completely full. And thank you so much for that. And this other woman said, well, can I tell you what's behind it? What happened? And she shared that with them. And bottom line, these women became really close friends. And like the next several stories are actually connected between these two women, which is really cool to think. And God has, if you'll obey in one thing, he's going, there's so many more stories. If you'll just, so this idea of listening, and who would ever come up with, like, she's thinking, God, how do you fix this lady? And God's like, yeah, give her an egg. So this is me on Sunday morning. We're going to have our Gen Zero church. And I'd read that story, and I'm a bunch of stories past that now. And there's some people that in our church that just were struggling with getting the disciple making piece down. And I've kind of tried, I thought I'd scared away everybody that it wasn't going to do it. But there's specifically maybe one or two people, one maybe especially, that was like, it's just not getting it. And so I prayed for them many times. I said, I'm just going to be quiet this morning. So I was just quiet before God. I'm praying for all the people, specifically this one person, that they would get it. And then I had to get in my car and drive, go running with some guys on Sunday mornings. And so I'm driving, still trying to be in this quietness. And probably after about 20 minutes of being quiet, sure is not something I would have come up on my own. Sure seemed like God. And he said, Jim, the problem here is that you're trying to make these people disciples or disciple makers. And that's not your job. That's my job. And I'm actually pretty frustrated with you that you're doing my job. I need you to apologize to me. And then I need you to apologize to every single person by name in your Gen Zero church. Don't you hate it when you're like praying for some other people to be fixed and then God's like, no, it's you. So So I immediately apologized to God. That's the easy one. But then later on Sunday morning, I turned to every single person in our church and by name, I shared the egg story and then I shared my story. And I turned to each person. I turned specifically to this one person who I just felt like is like so not getting it. And and that person was deeply, deeply moved by it. And they had a couple things in their life that I felt like were like barriers for them getting it. One of them was a financial barrier and just letting go uh and also disciple making thing. And that person, I've had conversations with them on these topics and said, I mean, in a loving way, you need to shape up. And instead I just said, I'm sorry that I've done God's role. And I'm done doing that. And I think God wants me to help coach you guys, but it's his responsibility. And just saying that and breakthrough in her and a couple other people doing it God's way. So just this idea of going, will we stop and listen? That's obviously is very applicable to this idea of going. So as I'm praying for people, will I stop and listen and go, God, what do you want me to pray for? Or in any issue in terms of, I mean, life, but let's focus on disciple making here. Do I stop and go, God, what do you want me to do? And then just listen and be quiet. I could share 4 more stories since then. That's part of my God time now every morning. Is part of it is I stop and go, okay, here's an issue today. Instead of praying over it, I just go, God, what do you want to tell me? And every single day, something significant has happened as I've done some things I would not have done. As God, I think the more you do this, the more you get used to hearing God as well. Let me share what this looked like for Anata this last week. So we did that training of a week ago of, what does Jesus say to do and not do, and who should you be looking for? And then, that the assignment at the end then is go find a potential person of peace. And if we've all led trainings, the next week, usually they've not found persons of peace. And if they've had any kind of conversations, like that's great, that's a win, Here's what this guy, Ananta, says. He goes, Jim, I'm so excited about applying this. So this was yesterday. He shared this with me. He said, so I said, God, what do you want me to do? Like, so he's already doing the listening thing. He's way better at that. And he directed me to a guy that I knew that has not been able to hear for 6 years. And he said, go pray over that guy. That's what he told me to do to find my person of peace. So when I did for half an hour, and at the end of the half an hour, the guy's hearing came back. He said, and then I did something, and this guy's healed many people. He said, but then I did what I'd never done before. He said, I said, hey, who in your life might be interested in this story that God's done in you? Would want to learn more about Jesus as well. And the guy's like, everybody I know. And so he went out and shared it with 60 people. And he said 13 came immediately to a meeting, and they all decided to follow Jesus in that. And I said, Ananta, what'd you do next? And he said, I didn't know. What I don't know. I'm waiting for you. So then I walked him through Discovery Bible Study the next week of the training. And I said, when are you going to do this with these people? And he said, Jim, I'll do it tomorrow morning, because it was night for him. Have you ever been in the training where it's like they're waiting to plant a church because the training's going too slow? And he simply just was, listening, and then did what God said. And he's supposed to call me this. Maybe he already has. I haven't looked today, but that he was hoping this group would start, and he was going to go through the first 7 commands of found in the book of Acts. So here's what we're going to do. So this idea of always being on mission, which probably is like a firm grasp of the obvious. Yeah, okay, I get that. I'm a disciple maker. I'm supposed to get this. But just asking, is that really a habit in your life? If I were to follow you around for a week, would I describe you as you are always dripping God in conversations? And that doesn't mean everything turns into a spiritual conversation, but you're always testing the waters to see if there is. Because I've sure found they never run up to me and just start bringing up God. I initiate it, and then, or a pain point comes out, but bottom line is you want to see that you're the kind of person they could come to. And then second, always be listening to God. So always be dripping God, and then always be listening to God. Have you got in the habit of asking God for the things, is this finding a person of peace? Or, so we said, man, pray for it for sure, but also then ask God for the specific details of how he wants to bring that about. So here's what I want us to do today, is to live out that second principle just for a couple minutes. I want to ask, would you identify if, hey, what's something that you would like God's wisdom in terms of disciple making? And as we're in this series called, um, finding your first person of peace, maybe that's it. God, how do you want me to go about? Where's my first person of peace? What do you want me to go about to do? But it could be something else as well. It could be something within your church, but it's connected to disciple making. But I want you to think of something. And then I want us just to be quiet. And if you want to even, make your screen black, I'm going to just give us like 3 minutes, which I know we're rushing the Holy Spirit. But man, I found sometimes this week, God answers immediately. And just be quiet and ask God that question. Ask it out loud in your room, not so we can hear it, be on mute. And then I want us to, after 3 minutes, I'll bring us back. I just want to ask, did anybody hear anything? And can we unmute mics? And I just want to hear what God said. And probably those will be like 7,000 times more powerful than whatever I already said to you guys today. But that we would live out that principle already. Is that cool? Does that make sense?